and I commend this bill to the House.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call on this bill. As other speakers have noted, there is a lot to be said positively about this bill, in the sense that it takes seriously the issues that have been raised about smuggling and about protecting our flora and fauna by increasing fines and trying to address some of the inconsistency within the various fine regimes that cover our conservation estate, that cover the flora and fauna that, as the previous speaker has said, we're all so proud of in New Zealand. It always strikes me, Mr Speaker, when we look at legislation that is about fines and regimes for penalties, that we find ourselves in the House continuously trying to update them like some kind of inflation index here within the House. And I do wonder at the wisdom sometimes of legislation that sets dollar figures and then expects the time to stand still and those dollar figures to somehow mean something. And as Ruth Dyson said earlier, when you have a situation where it's a $500 fine or 1 year in prison, that indicates that time has gotten away on the legislation. And I do think overall there's a question of whether it's wise to be setting in legislation particular dollar figure penalties when in fact what we're trying to do is express the will of Parliament about the seriousness of these offences, and whether actually we are better off with some other kind of system that doesn't require us to come back as some form of inflation index every few years and make the changes that we are being proposed tonight by Jackie Dean. But that's obviously not in the scope of this particular bill, and the fine increases and penalty increases that are indicated in the bill seem, Mr Speaker, to me to be reasonable, and certainly from the Labor Party's point of view we're keen to see this bill go to the Select Committee to discuss the wisdom of the penalties regimes as they stand. But if we're talking about making things consistent, there's one thing that we can say that is absolutely consistent about this government's approach to conservation matters, and that is the fact that from the day they have entered office they have undermined the operations of the Department of Conservation. From the very... Now, Dr Smith says rubbish. Let's go through the record, Mr Speaker. The 2009 budget cut $54 million out from the Department of Conservation. 400 job losses, Dr Smith. That's what was projected just in 2009. And Dr Smith says, over how many years? It doesn't matter, Dr Smith. Taking $54 million out of the budget of the Department of Conservation undermines the work. And it's all very well for national members to come to this House with bills that look like they care about the conservation estate, that improve the penalties regime. But sitting behind that, Mr Speaker, is a cut of $54 million from the Department of Conservation. In September last year, they announced that they were cutting 96 members of staff at the Department of Conservation. That's staff from 12 conservancies right around the country. And Mr Speaker, members of this House will know, as they travel around the country, the impact of those cuts on those local conservancies. And it's not like it was the great back office cuts that we were told about, Mr Speaker. These are people in regional New Zealand who are charged with protecting our conservation estate that this government has cut. And these people include the scientists. And as Ruth Dyson said before, what the department needs is the ability to be able to provide the information for the evidence-based decisions that Dr Smith and others would tell us that they believe in. But it's those scientists, Mr Speaker, who have lost their jobs under this government. They have systematically undermined the Department of Conservation. And what we're now left with is a situation where only 250 of 2,700 threatened species are actually under active management. Louise Upston says, how's this relevant? What's the point of a penalties regime that involves the conservation estate if the government undermines the very protection of that estate, of the protection of the flora and fauna that this government says they care about? They put the penalties regime up, but the department that is charged with looking after that is consistently undermined by this government. And now we have a department department reliant on private donations and groups to fill in the gaps. And it's great to see corporations getting behind things like Kiwi Recovery. But in the end, if the BNZ decides it's got other priorities, there's nothing left inside this department. Mr. Speaker, we support this bill to select committee, but we do so knowing that this government has a record of undermining conservation.
Eugenie Sage.
Thank you.